Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to return to the subject of UniFi, but today I want to help those that are kind of new to the whole world of UniFi, Ubiquiti, UI, call it what you like. I've dealt with a lot of these products in the third party quite a lot over the years on support calls or when I've been doing on-site maintenance for some people I work with. But it's only really been in the last 12 to 18 months that I've been really sinking my arms up to the elbow in the world of UniFi. And I'll say right now, for those tippy-toeing in for their own personal setup, both on the small and large scale, it can get very confusing. UniFi has got certain terminology, certain product names, and a lot of confusion over what is the right solution for you, or when one product isn't actually the same as another, and you might end up getting the wrong thing. And that's what today's video is about. It's going to cover three main elements. It's going to talk about the layout of the network appliances in your home or business. Then we're going to delve into the portfolio on UniFi's site and sort of work out the distinctions on a lot of their products and hopefully help you understand their terminology. And finally, at the end, we're going to talk about some of the kind of out there products in the UniFi portfolio that you may or may not know about. But before we go any further, we've got to nail down the fundamentals. On the table here is kind of what I'd like to think of as a great layout for UniFi. On the end here, we have gateways and routers. These are what are going to be dealing with the incoming internet connectivity in your home or business. Your ISP may have provided you with a router that may live one layer behind this, but this is where the data enters. The reason we talk about gateways and routers is it's not actually the same thing. They sound like they are, but at least in the UniFi terminology, these can go into things like cloud keys. These are on a question of scale and implementation and deployment, what you're going to need to deal with the inbound and outbound processes and data packets with the wider internet. Next up is switches. That's probably the product on this table you're most familiar with. Switches are dealing with network traffic internally, and although routers and gateways often have multiple Ethernet ports on them, it's worth highlighting that when it comes to the basic exchange of data packets in an internal network, a switch is always paramount. There is both managed and unmanaged, which means unmanaged, the switch doesn't have any means of configuration to access and everything's set to default. Or you can have a managed switch where you do have an element of control, normally a GUI in most cases, to kind of manipulate bond ports together, have failover, which is when one port takes over another if one of them fails, and ultimately is for the internal management there. Again, a number of these facilities are possible with gateways and routers, but it's worth highlighting that they are balancing the outside world and the inside world, and in many cases it's better to separate them into different handling processes and then allow an extra layer of security and control in the middle. But we'll talk more about gateways later on. Next up, APs, access points. Predominantly these are associated with Wi-Fi connections, although you can get ones that are hybrid, physical and wireless. Ones like this one, which have a physical Ethernet port there on the rear that can also supply power over something called PoE or power over Ethernet. These are what you're going to be utilizing when accessing the wider area network and indeed the internet services wirelessly. This does not work on its own directly via your router in most cases. You can connect it to an available Ethernet port on the router in your home and it will work to a point, but its capabilities and full potential will never be really fully realized. Next up, surveillance devices. UniFi has a huge extensive portfolio of surveillance devices, both for recording and managing wider surveillance operations, as well as the cameras themselves. And again, we're not going to delve too much onto this subject in the video, largely because I think more than anything else here on the table, it's the most self-evident element in their portfolio. Cameras and NVRs or network video recorders are what are going to manage and house all of the surveillance in your home or business environment. The last section here, I call them integrations, but they could be called accessories, they could be called add-ons, and this is where things get confusing because there are a number of different devices in the UniFi portfolio that enhance, improve, or merge all of these devices in one, many, or all forms into a single operation. Again, we'll touch on those later in the video. But before we delve into the portfolio and talk about some of the standout items on there and how to differentiate them between them, it is worth highlighting that one of the reasons UniFi has become so popular over the years is twofold. Number one, the controller software, the UniFi controller or UI software allows you to micromanage your whole network via a single pane interface there, a single pane of glass or a single screen that allows you to manage your network, manage your routing, manage your surveillance, manage your APs all together. And some devices, such as the access points or the unmanaged routers, and even the managed ones to a point, do not include that software. They require, to make the most of them, another system to be connected, like the router, that has that software on board and therefore can manage these. The same goes if you want to manage your UniFi network externally, that is to say outside of your local area network and that internet connection. You're going to need a device that supports either direct connection to a cloud managed version of that software via something called Site Manager, or you're going to have a system in place that has that software on board to manage these in conjunction with remote access services. And of course, that brings us to one of the most popular devices in the entire makeup of UniFi products, and that is the Dream Machine. That's another one of those catch terms that UniFi throws out there that can often confuse people. The UniFi Dream Machine is one of those cluster devices. It can be utilized to manage an local area network, as well as install numerous applications such as surveillance, such as attaching wireless APs and creating VLANs, virtual local area networks, and some of those integrations we've discussed. So although I'm talking about individual devices in this video, keep in mind that one of UniFi's really unique selling points is that they have released these hybrid merging devices that we'll talk about later on that combines the features and facilities of a number of the things on this table all into one. But let's head over to the portfolio and talk about some of those individual products and distinctions. So now we've broken down the individual network and appliance segments you're going to have in your home or business environment. This is when we have to kind of dig into each of those with regards to the portfolio here. So let's start with that first one. That's going to be where the internet is coming in to a home or business environment there. Now for that, we're looking at those routers and gateways that we're going to be talking about. We're also going to touch as well on the Express later on. And keep in mind, again, as mentioned earlier on, there are lots of cluster devices from UniFi that borrow a lot of the features and services that we're going to talk about and pop them into one device, and that may be the one for you, and I'll touch on those throughout the video. But for now, a router is probably the thing we know the most about. A router, you normally get them from your internet service provider, your ISP, and that is the device that is managing the safe, secure, and rapid turnover of data between your home or business and the wider internet there. For features and facilities such as the installation of VPN-based management and encryption protocol there, as well as a limited capacity to manage multiple networks. Now, routers from UniFi do manage VLANs, do allow for bonding of ports internally. There's lots of bits and bobs that you may find in your average switch in the marketplace there. But again, the difference between a router and a switch is a router is predominantly designed to manage the inside of your network or networks, whereas a router is designed as the doorway to the wider internet. Now, where does this distinction between a router and a gateway make itself known? That is to do with the scale of your operation. So, for example, if you're a small home user, even a small business or a small home lab, these are environments where you're not going to need fundamental control of so many individual devices all clustered inside their own subnetworks or those virtual LANs as discussed. If you don't think you've got that kind of aggressive data packet management requirement, as well as the enhanced integrity checks and data security checks in place or required, then you don't really need to go for a gateway device. You can settle for a traditional router there. And again, that is to do with the exchange of data of all of those sub-managed networks or an individual single network back and forth with the internet there. Now, again, we are tippy-toeing onto what switches are for, but we'll get onto that later on. Now, gateways and routers deviate quite wildly within the UniFi network. For example, you've got things like the Dream Wall, which is a high-performance wall-mounted combination router and element of smart managed switch there, all rolled into one. Again, we could talk a lot more about network connectivity, gigabit, 10 GBE and PoE, but a lot of these are concepts you may already be aware of there. These are really just questions of one, the amount of data being exchanged per pathway, or if you need devices such as access points that require power delivered on the same cable and channel as the data is being supplied as well. Now, we mentioned earlier about those cluster devices, and one of the most well-known ones is, of course, the Dream Machine there. This takes on a lot of the concepts and management we've already discussed. And in most cases, a lot of users that don't have complex networks, but still nonetheless want to take advantage of the majority of the features and services of UniFi will often go for a Dream Machine for that very reason. But some of you may see the benefit in an Express. Now, an Express streamlines a lot of the external data management of a UniFi network there via that single box. It effectively gives you everything that the Dream router does, and to a point what the Cloud Gateway does, but on a far more streamlined level. It is designed for simplicity, and it is designed to be a much smaller operation. Also with support of meshes, it is another overlap by UniFi, not only to integrate those network gateways and internet gateways, but also to integrate mesh wireless transmission, where you would have multiple of these devices dotted around a home or business environment communicating in a not a dissimilar way to you would have individual switches connected physically via Ethernet cables. Which now brings us onto the subject of switches. Again, these are the devices that are predominantly associated with managing the local area network inside your home or business environment. Now, there are considerations such as the aforementioned PoE, Power over Ethernet, and of course, the number of physical ports that are available to you, as well as the individual performance and bandwidth afforded via those individual connections. Just keep in mind that, for example, a switch that has multiple 10 GBE ports is only allowing for the data to pass through at a maximum 10 gigabit or 1000 megabytes per second per connection. Keep in mind, you're still going to need to have powerful enough devices and or processing power and storage to facilitate that bandwidth. But already you've seen here on screen the deviations in pricing between a lot of these devices, notwithstanding the number of ports and the speed of those ports seems to be wild and all over the place. Now, a lot of the naming convention helps us a little when it comes to UniFi, such as enterprise or campus, enterprise campus and more. These do kind of imply the scale of their deployment. But the biggest thing to keep an eye on more than any other is to do with layer 2 and layer 3. Designation. Now, a layer 2 switch is designed to handle one network, one subnet of devices, and it manages the routing between them, as well as allowing you to bind or bond individual ports and have that failover we mentioned earlier on, but all within a single network. The distinction between a layer 2 and a layer 3 switch, firstly, is that a layer 3 switch can manage multiple networks all together. So if you have switches connected to a layer 3 switch, you can manage all of those as a kind of overseer control. A big part of that, notwithstanding higher hardware embedded inside that allows high performance and management to be possible, is to do with how devices on the network are categorized. In a layer 2 environment, they are generally only tracked on IP.
I'm reviewing the situation. Can a fella be a villain all his life?
That is the network identity, whereas on a layer 3 switch, things can be tracked by their MAC address. That's an identifying ID that shows a device moving around the network. The IP, of course, being a position on the network. It's like the difference between moving house from address to address and tracking you by your name and identifying signature rather than the door on the street, because the minute you move to another house, you're not going to be found. That isn't to say that a layer 2 switch isn't able to cope with a device moving around on its own local area network. It can, But a layer 3 switch, because it not only identifies individual doors on the street, but the individual devices therein, it allows for a greater degree of control and management of devices individually through those multiple subnetworks and multiple managed physical switch networks to be made possible thanks to that level 3 or L3 layer 3 control. Above and beyond that, the majority of other switches on the UniFi website can actually be designated quite easily. You just need to differentiate them, notwithstanding the layer 2 and the layer 3 protocols that we've discussed by, again, PoE delivery, for example. So a higher PoE delivery across multiple ports will allow for either more ports to provide power to connected devices like cameras, or a greater degree of power at the base level to be shared out against individual ports on there. We could talk more about 10 GBE, 2.5 GBE network performance, but I think we've already touched on that a great deal. Ultimately, these are about physical connections and the amount of power they deliver, the amount of performance they deliver, and of course, differentiating between types of port. And by types of port, what I mean is, predominantly, when it comes to switches, connections arrive in two different variations, copper and fibre. There are a few middling ones in between when you're talking about high density, but when it comes to the majority of modern switches, and certainly in the case of UniFi, it comes down to those two options. Now, copper is the one that you're going to be most familiar with. Currently available up to 10 GBE quite easily. You can run cables on there very, very easily to around about 20 to 50 meters, depending on the connection bandwidth that you're going to be utilizing there. But if you're going to be running huge distances and you want low latency and you want a lot more customization, then chances are SFP or the fiber-based connection is going to be the one you go for. It covers a larger distance, and although the cables themselves, once you get to a certain distance, actually work out more affordable than standard CAT cables, it's still arguable that you're going to have to factor in a lot more spending because SFP requires little transceivers to adapt and incorporate this cabling into the switching. So depending on the scale of your deployment, maybe keep that in mind. And now we come to what I believe to be one of the messiest areas of UniFi's portfolio that really doesn't need to be, and that is access points. Now, access points for most users are going to be the most important when it comes to accessing the internet and also sharing data across their local area network, because a lot of people don't want to use wires these days, and if you were going to look at wires capabilities and using Ethernet cables and more, that's where your switches came in. But the majority, and I do mean the majority of access points in UniFi's portfolio here, are based on wireless technology. A number of them do have physical interfaces that can be used at the same time, but this is where we're going to have a lot of wireless points either connecting directly from one to one. So for example, you can take advantage of, say, this, a Pro Series access point that you would physically connect to allow for a Wi-Fi point into a physical network cabled environment, or you can go for multiple in what's known as a mesh system, where you can have multiple wireless nodes dotted around the home or business, and as you travel around, your device, remember tracking you on your Mac, will then MAC address, handing you between router points without you even knowing. That's how mesh points work. Apologies in the slight change of recording here. I noticed when I recorded this video that this section I wasn't really happy with in terms of what was covered, and also the audio was slightly out of sync, so I wanted to re-record it here. Carrying on with the access points, I'll say right now, first thing to keep in mind, that number there on the end of all of these represents the classification of the Wi-Fi output. Now, if you go back real far in UniFi's history, AC was originally one of the profiles of Wi-Fi, aka Wi-Fi 5, and things have moved forward now to Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7, with Wi-Fi 6E in the middle there. Now, Wi-Fi 7, one of the major benefits it will provide if the devices in your local area network, on the local Wi-Fi network there, support Wi-Fi 7, is this. You see these charts here at the bottom? You're going to see a chart like this all over the place. This applies, by the way, to not just Wi-Fi routers and access points from UniFi, but otherwise as well. And that is that, as you can see here, all of these channels here represent little connections, blocked client devices that are exchanging data with the router there. Whenever you see a router that says it can do 6,000 megabits per second, that is shared across all of the devices therein. Now, as you can see here, the one at the bottom here is 320 megahertz. That is one exchange happening between a client device. But Wi-Fi 7 allows for you to have multiple shared channels there at any given time, whereas the rest of these packets here at 160, 800 megahertz here, and again, let's not get frequencies and packet connections mixed up too much. 320 megahertz packet exchange there not only allows for more data and therefore exceeding that of traditional gigabit wide connections, but also allows for that overlap in a way that it's just not possible there on previous spectrums there of the frequency. Now, that means in real terms that the Wi-Fi 7 devices here, again listed as Wi-Fi 7 Pro Max and Pro, these are going to allow for greater performance bandwidth potential between connected devices utilizing this. But just make sure your client devices can even be upgraded to Wi-Fi 7, or that they're already running on, say, Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6E, that they can at least take advantage of 5 gigahertz connections utilizing that 160 megahertz packet-to-packet opening there on the radio frequency. Now, the next thing to talk about is this differentiation between Pro, Max, Pro and non-Pro. A lot of this comes down to spatial antennae connections. You can see there, if we select one of them here and open it up in a new tab, you're able to see there that it detailed that it's got 8 spatial streams. Now that is ultimately how many hands it's got to deal with that incoming data. Each one of those is going to allow for a greater degree of management. So the larger the spatial streams, the more data and more efficiently it can handle data packets. Hence why you tend to find more as you scale up from standard to Pro into Pro Max. As you can see, they're going from 6 into 8. And then you have bridging devices like these ones here that scale up in their ability and profile and classification that allow you to connect individual points from a tremendous distance, building to building, in this case 5 kilometers, that would allow you to have 2 offices 5 kilometers apart be able to exchange data. And again, much like the other devices we've talked about, you can scale up their ability, their bandwidth and their power and performance by scaling up the individual profile there. Again, Pro, we've got campus designation and enterprise designation as well. Which brings us into surveillance, arguably one of the easiest areas of the UniFi portfolio to understand because it's tailor-made. First thing to keep in mind, however, and again I'm going to another quick shout out to the Dream Machine from earlier, you can't run the UniFi controller software on these. These are designated with their own Protect software, although there are UniFi products that allow you to install both the controller and the Protect, again like the Dream Machine and a few others. These are ones that are specifically tailored to the surveillance platform. That also means you can utilize them in a non-UniFi environment as well. And recently in UniFi Protect 5, they have integrated now the use of third-party cameras supporting a protocol known as ONVIF, O-N-V-I-F, which allows you to use not only their own cameras, but obviously you'll get a better experience with their cameras due to that integration. Also, they're not hugely expensive, but they will be if you buy the wrong one. To put it into perspective, many of these cameras have AI services on board, but the pricing strategy between them is leaps and bounds different. We've got an AI DSLR there at $765 without tax, whereas we have another AI camera here at the top retailing at just, let's have a look at it there, some of the ones there at 305, 229. We've got AI at 305. These are all profiled. Now, if you know about surveillance, you're going to know the difference, for example, between a bullet cam that's designed for outside, generally designated with an IP or ingress protection rating, IP66, 67 or 68, or you have indoor cameras that don't really have that profile because they're not weatherproofed, but they do have elements of PTZ, pan, tilt, zoom, or they're going to be cameras that are designated for 360 coverage, such as this one here, which you mount on the ceiling, which then overlooks everything around it there. A lot of that you'll already know without any background knowledge of surveillance applications from UniFi. You will know that anyway when looking at NVR solutions there. But just keep in mind, notwithstanding, obviously their NVR appliances here largely have the same hardware, with the exception of a few different network interfaces on the rear to deal with a much larger degree of input. But on top of that, hard drive profiling there, and of course PoE inputs there. That's another thing to keep in mind. For example, if we go for their enterprise solution here, it supports up to 74K cameras, but it only has one network interface. So you're going to have to factor in a network switch alongside that, or you're going to have to factor in some sort of PoE equipped switch for the cameras that are going to be connected into it, which they themselves require that additional power there. Now, moving back into the cameras and what you can get for your camera security, if you are interested in AI recognition, so that is the difference between edge AI, which tends to just notice what a human is, what a car is, and lines, to AI detection and analysis, which is when it understands who these people are, understands who they aren't, recognize license plate registration, people count, and that sort of stuff. That's where the integration of AI and non-AI cameras comes into play, because you can go for a non-AI designated camera, and the UniFi Protect software will do the work of identifying what a human is and stuff like that. And it's only when you go to the AI appliance cameras where they've got a lot of that analysis internally. But keep in mind, you're not locked in on that, because there are a few add-ons like the AI port that you can run between a non-AI, much more affordable camera and the MVR appliance there in the middle, connected in out, and it handles the AI processing for you. So don't think buying a non-AI camera from UniFi locks you out of the more analytical AI advantages in surveillance there. And once again, this is going to be another one of those areas where if you buy the wrong UniFi solution at the gate when it comes to surveillance, you may be in trouble. For example, when we look at the Cloud Key Plus and the UniFi Express, both of these can run UniFi software to a larger or lesser degree there. But keep in mind that something like the Cloud Key allows you to run, thanks to its internal storage, some of those Protect appliances, as well as manage and navigate a connected UniFi Protect appliance if need be and route it. Whereas something like a UniFi Express does not. It can manage a UniFi system, again, with Protect on board or a UNVR solution as a minimized streamlined gateway to a UniFi system makeup network, but it can't run Protect in of itself. So make sure you are going to have the Protect software on a system, at least at the very margin, disconnected from the larger outside world with a UniFi controller appliance there on its own. You don't have to, but it will be very, very advantageous to do so, and therefore you might want to think about where that Protect is going to live. Which brings us on to what I think will be my favourite section, the random stuff, the integrations, the add-ons, the bells and whistles. A lot of these, the name just isn't enough. The Mission Critical, for example, acts as a kind of redundant power supply, power backup between a UniFi power backup device and that of UniFi PoE cameras in between there. Again, very odd, very weird, very specialised item. We've got things like the NAS that we've talked about, and VoIP cameras, VoIP phone systems, and pretty much all of that kind of weird camera screen stuff. The UniFi digital signage, which you can connect to your UniFi appliance to either output some big screen to your clients or can actually be used as a control deck in some cases. You've got mobile routers and stuff like that. Some of this stuff is a lot more understandable than others, but it's when you start getting into some of those middling ones that we've already talked about, they either act as smart gateways or act as a control failover as well, is when things can get really, really complicated. A lot of this we've already discussed, some of which, by the way, it's worth highlighting that the UniFi controller and a lot of the UniFi management can actually be offloaded onto a third-party appliance these days. It's a little bit more finicky than it used to be. Maybe UniFi wanted to stay a little bit more proprietary than some might like, but nonetheless, it's still good to have that option if you want to go for some of their other devices that we previously discussed without relying on their own hardware for the actual controller. You can offload that onto a third-party appliance if you like and still lock in with a lot of their accessories being UniFi branded, where you can really offset the cost quite substantially. And some things are just tailored more than others. For example, here's some standout optional accessories, things like this. This allows you to turn any SFP or fiber-based connection on your UniFi system into an RJ45, a standard copper there. And if you're running a UniFi system that has a 10 GBE outlet, but you're not running a large multi-site operation, you've got a small contained environment, you may wish to move away from SFP to take advantage of standard copper cabling. This will allow you to connect a 10 GBE or 1 GBE connection, scaling in price, port on your physical UniFi device from fibre into copper there very easily. The same goes if you've got cameras dotted around your home or business environment that require PoE, but you're not running a PoE switch. You can take advantage of something like this. Will allow you to supply power to a PoE camera, and they're pretty darn affordable and supplied across different variations of output input in PoE. Same goes for USB-C, more micro cameras as well. Then you've got the rack station, very, very popular online, and I'll be honest, I love mine. A small portable rack cabinet that you can knock around your home or business environment. It's mobile, it's tiny, and it houses a lot of stuff there. Easy to put together and surprisingly affordable for what it is. Enhancement for cameras. We already talked about the AI add-on that you can add to a camera to add some of the analytical services there. These are specific tools that you can bolt onto your existing camera very easily and scale them up remarkably in other ways. Dual mounts for the camera. There's a lot of accessories there. The point I'm making is, if you are going to look at UniFi solutions in your home or business environment, each individual solution you find on there, do not be surprised before you buy it if you take the time to go into the accessories or integrations area and find ways to scale it up or tailor it to your needs even more. So again, if you're on the fence about a solution, it doesn't quite fit the mold, double check the accessories and integrations first, because you may find means on there to adapt it to your needs a great deal more. But there you go. I hope you found this video helpful. I've really tried to toe the line between not being condescending and ensuring that I don't tell people stuff they already know, but at the same time trying to explain everything with a fresh set of eyes. I know a video like this is not designed for the die-hard, already knee-deep UniFi user. This is for people that are about to make the jump in and to understand not only the distinctions between certain products for their needs, but also making sure that you buy the right product the very first time for your network in terms of security, performance, and utility. If you've got any questions about UniFi, I'm so brain melted by it all now that in the comment section I will gladly answer your questions just to get it out of here and into your head. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.